This is Lisa Wickham, Session 4 of Interpersonal Mindfulness. So bringing interpersonal mindfulness forward in all different areas in our life, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in our academics situations, or whether it's in our more personal relationships in our lives, our friendships, our loved ones, all of these things. So again, just highlighting, and we'll go through each of these in this session, but this idea of bringing it forth in the workplace. Whether we're in a position where we're managing others or interactions with our peers and coworkers, interacting with our managers, certainly interacting with our clients. This idea of interpersonal mindfulness can have a huge impact on the areas in our workplace, in our professional lives. And then again, as a student in our school situations, interacting with our peers, interacting with our instructors. Again, very, very positive benefits of knowing more skillful ways of communicating. And then our social and personal lives, interacting with our peers and friends and family, with our significant others. So looking more closely at the workplace, this idea of, managing others, we could actually intentionally ask ourselves, if we're in the position of managing others, what kind of a boss do I want to be? What kind of a coworker do I want to be? How well do I want to get along with my coworkers? How do you want to interact with your clients? Often when a client has a grievance, or is a difficult client, or is argumentative, they simply want to be heard, to be listened to. So this idea of mindful listening when someone has a grievance is not necessarily agreeing with the other person or admitting that they're correct. It's simply listening, seeking to understand what it is that client might need to tell us. This can lead not only to resolution and cooperation, this can have a huge impact of how our business is going to run. So again, looking at the bullets on this screen, interacting with your manager, that could go really smoothly or not so smoothly, and by using these skills, we can make a difference in how it is when we're interacting with our manager, with our coworkers, with our clients. Problem solving and crisis management. These are huge beneficial skills for us in the workplace. So we've talked about the benefit of mindfully checking in with ourselves, noticing any reactivity we might be having. This is one of the enormous benefits of interpersonal mindfulness. The ability to manage ourselves. That's powerful. If you think about this, if we're not able to manage ourselves, it makes it all the more difficult to manage others or to manage a stressful situation. This idea of having self-control, the ability, when we're mindful and able to tap into and explore the reactivity we might be having, we can actually manage our disruptive emotions and impulses. We can manage impulsive feelings and those distressful emotions that can quickly just lead us right into an emotional storm. So again, going back to that mindful check-in, checking in with ourselves, what's going on in the internal climate? What is the climate? What is the storm that's happening? Where are my thoughts going? Am I being swept away by emotion? Can I walk away for just a few moments, pause, take a deep breath, gather my thoughts? These are skillful means. They help us stay composed, positive, and unflappable, even in the most trying of moments. This ability to think clearly and stay focused under pressure. Because the reality is stress is always going to happen. Not all clients are happy clients. People do come up with grievances. So this is a skill set to be able to learn how to manage ourselves so that we can manage others. And this doesn't mean self-criticism, right? We're not talking about awareness and being critical of ourselves or beating ourselves up. We're talking about being aware of what's going on with that non-judgmental attitude, meeting ourselves with a sense of kind regard. When we get really stressed at work, if someone's really confrontational and giving us a hard time, it can be hugely beneficial to take a deep breath, hit the pause button, and internally say to ourselves, wow, this is really challenging. What's my next best move? That's kind regard. That's supporting ourselves. Changing our unskillful habits to more skillful means. So again, interpersonal mindfulness. I love this line, as we are with ourselves, so we are with others. This is an important thing to notice for ourselves. If we are hugely self-critical of ourselves, if we're constantly beating ourselves up, seeing ourselves in a negative light, telling ourselves we can never do anything right, or whatever the negative comment and barrage is, that's how we are with others as well. This is important. This is our one and precious lifetime. And we get to decide, how is it we want to be with ourselves? Do we want to be kind and generous with ourselves? Because if we're doing that, we tend to be so with others as well. This idea of calm awareness, insight, and skillful means. Tapping into our own wisdom and making informed decisions. That is a far different scenario than knee-jerk reactivity. When someone says something that strikes us the wrong way and we lash out, that is not interpersonal mindfulness. That's reactivity. So again, as I've mentioned before, this is not easy. This is changing habits to more skillful means. And it takes practice and insight and awareness and resolve. It takes intention. And then this idea of meeting whatever is arising with a sense of kind regard for ourselves, with a sense of kindness. So I love this line. Think about this. If we're meeting ourselves with kindness, that might not be the same thing as happiness. You know, we might not be able to change a difficult interaction with someone. We might not be able to change how the other person is interacting. But we do have the ability to change those interactions within ourselves. So it might not change to happy, but it could change to kindness. So this idea of goodwill toward ourselves, always toward ourselves first, goodwill toward ourselves and then toward others. So studies show, there's been many studies out there, and some of this kind of blends into emotional intelligence, but studies actually show that a lot of us that get promoted or get raises, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with our intelligence level or our job skills or our credentials, but it has a lot to do with how skillful we are in our working relationships. That is huge. How do we interact with ourselves? How do we interact with others? So looking just real briefly at different communication styles, there's passive, there's aggressive, there's passive-aggressive, and then there's assertive. So an assertive is the one we're aiming for. That's the healthy, skillful, balanced place we want to be. But just to kind of put a few definitions around this, you know, passive is giving other people our control. You know, it's kind of handing over our own power to other people, letting others make the decisions or letting others do all the talking. It's like if you've ever heard, you know, the saying of being a doormat, you know, oh, no, it's okay, saying things like that, even when it's not okay with ourselves. It's another way of defining passive is almost having the attitude of, You're okay, but I'm not okay. So we don't want passive. And then aggressive is the other side of the spectrum, right? Talking over other people, insisting that we're right and others are wrong, blaming and shaming, or silencing others in a multitude of different ways. This is the other side of the spectrum. This also is not really healthy and balanced. Another way of looking at being aggressive is an attitude of, I'm okay, but you're not okay. And then this idea of passive aggressive. These are things like saying things that put others on the defensive. Like, are you nuts? For example. Other ways of being passive aggressive. There's many ways of being passive aggressive. Giving backhanded compliments. Ignoring or not saying anything at all. Procrastinating. Leaving someone out. Or bad-mouthing somebody behind their back, gossiping, sabotaging someone, keeping score. These are all examples of ways that people can be passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive behavior tends to be manipulative, and it's definitely unclear communication. It has hidden meanings or confusing meanings. You know, if you've ever heard someone say, fine, whatever, that tends to be a little bit more passive-aggressive. And then this idea of assertiveness. This really is the balanced place. Being assertive. For many of us, there can be confusion between what's the difference between being assertive and being aggressive. If you look at it as a continuum, aggressive behavior is really just kind of rolling over someone. Assertiveness is speaking our mind in respectful ways. It's speaking our own truth and having the courage actually to do so. It's not always met with kind regard from other people, but it's important to know the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. Being assertive is speaking our truth, speaking it, as I mentioned before, in respectful ways. Respect for ourselves, respect for the other. We're not plowing the other one down, but we are speaking up for ourselves. This is really important. And it's important to notice also that this is a continuum, as you can see here on your screen. And that this is not about judgment. It's not about judging other people. Actually, for each and every one of us, we find ourselves somewhere on this spectrum at any given time. We've all had moments when we've been passive. And we've all had moments when we've been aggressive. And we've all had moments when we've been passive-aggressive. So again, this is about gaining a skill set, right? Setting the intention to be assertive. Very, very important. Finding the balance in that. And then as you see at the bottom, I have calm assertiveness. This is really the nature of mindful interaction. Calm assertiveness. We don't have to raise our voice. We can keep our reactivity in check, right? Take that deep breath, hit the pause button, get ourselves centered and grounded. Think about what we want to say before we speak, and then say it in a calm, assertive way with respect to ourselves and respect for the other. So what does calm assertiveness allow us? It allows a lot of things. We get to speak on our own behalf. That's really important. We all have things that we need to say in the conversation. Having empathy and showing concern for our own thoughts, feelings, and needs, and then outwardly for others' thoughts, feelings, and needs as well. So in other words, when we are practicing calm assertiveness, we're saying things in a kind way. And we can say even difficult things with a sense of kindness. So to think about that, when we spill into blaming or calling people names or whatever, that's spilling over into aggressiveness. So it's this idea of choosing our words carefully, saying them with kindness, but speaking the truth, even if it's something that's hard for the other person to hear. And then this idea of collaborating resources for solving problems and challenges. Interpersonal mindfulness in your educational setting. So how can this be helpful while you're a student in your present situation? Well, it's hugely beneficial if we have interpersonal mindfulness skills, this idea of mindful speaking and listening when we're interacting with our instructors, right? If we have this idea that we're listening with intention, listening with the idea of seeking to understand, we're going to pick up on directions and instructions a whole lot more easily and a whole lot more effectively if we have the skill set of mindful listening, right? That's one way that we can interact much more effectively with our instructors. If we have something we need to bring up with our instructors that might be difficult or challenging, again, these skill sets are hugely beneficial. Speaking with that calm assertiveness and really choosing our words carefully, being lean of speech and getting right to the point. Many, many benefits here. Our interactions with our peers in an academic setting. If you're doing a group project, for example, hugely beneficial if everybody is on the same page and effectively communicating with one another, being respectful of everybody's needs. This idea of attention management, really honing our attention, being intentional around our intention, staying on focus on task. And this idea of intentional living, this can just kind of broaden to every aspect of our lives. How do we want to be in the world? How do we want to be within our interactions? And then taking interpersonal mindfulness into our personal lives with our friends, our families, our significant other, our social situations, making the decisions for ourselves of what we want our personal life to be like. Who do we want in our personal life? How do we want to interact with the people in our personal lives? How do we interact when families or friends are not being mindful and are not being respectful? We can't always change everybody else, but we can certainly change the way we handle things, the way we interact with ourselves, with others, with the rest of the world. So this idea of stable mind when we're using mindfulness practices, bringing stability to, where the mind is and, all the thoughts that are going on. Stable mind, stable body moves on to stable life, stable relationships. So just to see, this kind of highlights what the heck mindfulness is once again. Oftentimes when we are not being mindful, when we're being reactive, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. So again, highlighting that notion of checking in with ourselves, seeing what's going on internally. How are we in the moment? Mindfulness allows us to see things with clarity, to see things as they really are, in the present moment by moment, as things are arising, and seeing our own reactivity in any given situation. So a few things to remember here that I think are really important, because this is a new skill set that requires intention and it requires practice and experimenting with. It's really important to recognize that just because you are practicing mindful speaking and listening does not mean that others are. So to be really careful and to be protective of yourself, because there are people out there that interact in very aggressive ways. So it's important to tend to ourselves as we're practicing this skill set. These practices require patience, self-compassion, and mindful self-care. and to remember that you learn far more by listening. So remember that the way to even drop into it is hit the pause button. Notice, assess, listen, and then speak. To be fully present with another, we must first be fully present with ourselves. We can't be present with another if we're not really fully present with ourselves. This requires resiliency. It actually builds resiliency. And it requires patience and practice and courage. It requires an ability and a willingness to tend to ourselves and to our internal climate. When we hear that critical voice within us, we now have the ability to hit that pause button and stop. Maybe we can shift that critical voice to a voice that's a little bit more kind, to a little bit less judgmental of ourselves. So always safety first, always tending to ourselves first, always bringing in that huge practice of self-compassion and self-kindness. And that concludes session 4 and this lesson on interpersonal mindfulness.